everyone. Welcome to my Forward 50 session about content design. My name is Bridget Antwi. You'll see on the screen there, it's pronounced Entry. I'm team lead and senior content designer at the Ontario Digital Service. So I am not some random on the street speaking to you about content design. I have over 11 years of writing and content design experience. And so before we get started, I just want to just clarify that this session is about content design. So I'm going to focus on the words used to help people navigate web pages, digital products, and services. And obviously, I don't work alone. I'm part of a really amazing team. So the folks that you're seeing on the screen right now are the Ontario Digital Service content chapter. And these are the lovely folks that I work with that include amazing web editors, a team of senior content designers. We've recently taken on a senior French translator, and we also have a lovely intern. So, some of you may have never heard of content design. So, before I start talking about this, because I don't want to assume that everyone knows what content design is, I'm going to do a brief little history about content design. So, if you've never heard of content design, it's a technical writing discipline that's over 11 years old. It was created by Sarah Winters and the content design team that she led at Government Digital Services in the UK, and it was popularized, I should say, by the award-winning redesign of gov.uk. So the thing about content design is that it helps us move seamlessly across the web, and without it, we get stuck. So this is, if you'll do, I'll do a quick little before and after so you can do that, see that, right? So content design obviously helps us move across the web. So when it comes to content design, some of the main principles of the discipline include putting user needs first, basing decisions on user research, and giving the user only what they need. So, in order to design great content, it means you need to write in an accessible way. You need to write in clear language. You need to optimize for search engines, and you also need to optimize for the way people read online. And just to kind of make a little bit of a distinction, because I think sometimes, I forget to mention it or I kind of assume that people understand, but they don't. I want to just clarify that content design is not just limited to words. It's not about graphic design, fonts, icons, and it's not the same as copywriting, copy editing, marketing, and communications. So, the next thing I want to talk about, because I think it's important, I want to discuss why content design is so hard in government. And so, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the challenges, the frequent challenges, I should say, that I see working as a content designer in government and some possible solutions going forward. So, the first thing I want to talk about is that government has a tendency to believe they don't need experienced content designers or they can bring one in to do a quick edit right before launch, or that anyone with writing experience can also do content design. So I'm here to tell you that this is not true and it has to change. So, content design is a unique technical discipline that requires skill and experience. So, my job as a content designer is to help make it as simple as possible for your users to understand or use your product, your program, or your service. And in order for me to do that, I need to have a deep understanding of the offering and know why certain decisions were made along the way. So, the time to actually bring a content designer into your project is always at the beginning. So, the second challenge I want to talk about is that content designers ask a lot of questions, right? So, we have to in order to understand and explain information to end users. So, if you are somebody who is not accustomed to being asked clarifying questions by colleagues or a content designer, you may interpret all the questions that we're asking as like a personal attack, a negative criticism, or a critique of your intelligence or work. I just want to say it's not personal. It is actually the content design process to ask lots of questions, right? So the solution here is that it's really important that when you're working with a content designer that you assume positive intent and competence in your content designer. So the content design process, I guarantee you, will always reveal gaps that you or your team won't see because it's our job to explain policies, products, and services to audiences and people who are in a rush, who have no context. They just want a quick answer or to get the task done quickly. They're not invested in the subject and they don't care at all about what happens behind the curtain. They just want to do the thing that they came to do. So, the next challenge that I want to highlight when it comes to content design in government is that government has a tendency to believe that you can cover a bad or non existent service design with good content design. You cannot. If there are service design, feature design, or user journey questions that are unanswered, content design will be difficult. And so the solution to that is to do user research with end users. I cannot stress enough. User research is critical and it cannot be skipped. And it also can't be replaced by traditional forms of research that we typically do in government, like jurisdictional scans or stakeholder consultations. And so, the last challenge that I want to talk about when it comes to content design in government is that government has a tendency to publish content that's more focused on what it wants to say than what the user needs to know. And so, this makes content difficult to understand and act on. And so, again, the solution is it is important that you talk to end users to understand what they need and that you give users only what they need to complete their task or get the information that they need and for them to go. Right. So that's a little bit of a summary of some of the challenges about when it comes to content design that I've experienced and I know my team has experienced when we're trying to sort of, share a little bit and do the work of content designing in government. So the next thing I want to do, because I think it's important to sort of show you a bit of my content design process, is I want to do a demonstration. And so I just want to do a quick caveat. So I chose this page because it's an old page. I'm not necessarily going to name the specific ministry that it belongs to, but I just want to say that this I chose this page specifically because it's been a while since it was updated. It's part of sort of a broader suite of modernization that this particular ministry is going to be doing. So I just want to say that love the folks at this ministry. If you're from this ministry and you recognize this, love you. Giving a little caveat here about why I selected it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you a quick video of a page. It's called the Cultural Media Tax Credits page, and I want to show you what the page looks like. It might be a little bit challenging to, let's see if the video will play. Perfect, there you go. So just giving you a little bit of time to go through it. So you can see here that the content is pretty much FAQ style, a little bit difficult to navigate. And so I want to just talk a little bit about, in order for me, so what I did was I chose this page and then I decided to apply content design principles to it. So I want to talk a little bit about the tools and techniques that I used in order to basically revamp the page and make it easier to find, understand, and use. So the first thing I did was a content audit and evaluation. And with that, what I wanted to do was I needed to understand when the content was last updated. And I'm not sure if you saw it, but in the video, it says the last update happened in August of 2017. And I wanted to find out the original purpose of the content strategy and who the intended users were. And so I had to do a content audit and evaluation for that. Now, part of content audit and evaluation is basically just kind of checking out the landscape to see what others have written about it, what other information is out there. Very often with content designers, we go to social media. So we'll look at Twitter, we'll look at Reddit, we'll look at other social media platforms to see what people are talking about. If there's opportunity and time, we connect with the correspondence units because, or sometimes call centers, just because they're the people essentially who are tasked with helping people when our content doesn't help people. So you always kind of want to get a lay of the land first. The next thing I did was using Google and the Ontario.ca in-page search tool. I did some user research by reading different content on, I'm going to call it the Ministry of Pluto. So the Ministry of Pluto's web pages. I also checked out Canada.ca as well as Ontario Creates, which is sort of a media company that's funded by the government of Ontario. So by doing these two things, it helped me understand the current landscape since the content hadn't been updated since 2017. The next thing I did was I wrote a user story to help me narrow the focus, identify the end users and their needs, and then understand the goal and outcome of the content. Now, in the world of tech, user stories are used in lots of different ways. I'm specifically talking about user stories and content design. So an example of a content design user story is, as a person in a particular role, I want to perform an action or find something out so that I can achieve my goal of. Right. And so this was the user story that I developed for this content before I started writing. So I wrote that as a film, TV, digital media, book publishing, animation, or special effects corporation operating in Ontario, I want to find out how to claim one or more Ontario media tax credits so that I can get money back from the government of Ontario. So that was the overarching user story. And that's what I used to anchor all of the content that I then wrote. So in terms of I want to go through quickly my content design revisions and rationale. And so I'll go through them kind of step by step. And hopefully it'll all kind of come together at the end for you. So the first thing I did was I applied search engine optimization, or SEO, to the page title and lead. So the original content did not really have like a lead. So in order to do this, I used a tool called Google Trends to see the most common search terms in Ontario. And through Google Trends, I basically determined that film tax credit is the most popular search term in Ontario and Canada in general. And I also changed interactive digital media to digital media based on Google Trends search data for Ontario and Canada. So now a lead essentially is like a summary of what's going to be on the page. There was no lead on this page, which means when the user lands here, they have to scroll through the entire page to determine if they're on the right page. And this goes against content design principles of search engine optimization and overall creates a poor user experience. So the next thing I did was I made sure that, so first of all, it's important that your page has some sort of table of contents. On Ontario.ca, this happens automatically once you designate something with a heading two, but essentially it's important to have some sort of navigation tool at the top because it makes the content accessible and it complies with the Accessibility for Ontario with Disabilities Act and also meets WCAG 2.0 standards specifically for people using assistive devices. So to make the table of contents search engine friendly, easy to scan and understand, all the headings you'll see are clear and short, right? I've also included numbered steps at the beginning of every each of the headings. I'm sorry, each of the items in the table of contents because I need to create an information architecture and flow. I want to help users scan the content or skip to directly to relevant sections, and therefore anyone who chooses not to read the whole entire page can get a general idea of the steps by scanning the table of contents. So the next thing I did after this was I created an overview. So originally there was no overview section, but I added one to give the page some context. So although the lead, like I mentioned before, helps the user understand whether or not they're on the right page, you need an overview to explain what users can expect from the rest of this content, right? So to add context, essentially what I did was I highlighted what types of corporations are eligible to claim the tax credits. I spelled out clearly which cultural sectors the tax credits apply to. I included a bit of high level information about the credit amounts. And then after a bit of internet sleuthing, I found all this information on both the Ontario Creates website and Canada.ca. And I did the best I could to interpret the percentages and limits for the credits. But this, again, will need fact check from a subject matter expert. And so I made a note of that offside as well. So the next thing I did was step one, right? So for this, I used a principle called the inverted pyramid principle of content design. And so essentially what this means is that I included like just some important information at the top to help the user understand the end-to-end user journey, which is one of the key principles as part of Ontario's digital service standards, right? And so the reason you want to do this is because often like in government when we're accustomed to a program or a service, and so we understand what it's supposed to look like from end to end, but the user doesn't know because they're coming to it blind. So it's really important to just give a general overview about all the steps that need to occur before the person starts, right? I also used content design practice of numbered lists to make the steps clear and easy to read and just bolded important information. So the next thing I did in step two was I added a check your eligibility section. So the original content page did not include any eligibility information. And so by putting the eligibility information up front, this section just reflects the importance of information architecture and writing based on user needs, right? Because the user doesn't actually understand how to do this thing, you actually do need to walk them through all the things that they need to do. And so what I did also was before the user goes into the application or does anything else, they're being told to make sure they're eligible. So I also made sure that when I was linking off to things that I linked directly to the sector's eligibility criteria and not to a generic homepage, because again, that helps to create a better user experience. And then the next thing I did was, step three was basically prepare corporate income tax and other documents. So I added this step to clearly explain how the Canada Revenue Agency is part of this process and what documents the user needs to prepare for them, right? So to align with content design principles, essentially, I just kind of synthesized the information from Canada.ca as well as Ontario Creates, and I just created a really simple content outline of all the documents required for each individual tax credit. And then to make it further aligned with content design principles, I included just short preambles to explain what's going on. I applied proper headings and subheadings, as well as bulleted lists to make the content accessible, easy to scan, understand, and use. I also used meaningful links that send the user directly to the forms that they need to complete. And so the next thing I did was, so here's the interesting thing. I was almost done writing this thing before I actually realized that Ontario Creates used to be called the Ontario Media Development Corporation. And so I was like halfway done before I figured this out from just like general Googling. I missed it somehow. I basically found it like buried in a PDF from like, I don't know, 20, like 18 or something. And so basically, I basically included that information here because if I did not know that, like, if I hadn't found that information, I would not have known. I mean, I was writing it, I work in government, and I didn't know. So essentially what I did was the first time I mentioned Ontario Creates as part of the steps, I made note sure to mention that it's formally known as the Ontario Media Development Corporation because I think it's important information. So I also use meaningful links here throughout the content. It's for accessibility, and essentially the reason why you want to use meaningful links when you're content designing is that you need to tell users where they're going before they click on the link, right? And so that makes the content more accessible, and it also applies with WCAG 2.0 standards. The reason we do this is because if you use things like click here or learn more or whatever, like essentially somebody who's using an assistive device will go through your content and the content will just be click here, click here, click here, click here, right? Whereas when you use meaningful links, essentially if someone's using a assistive device, it'll actually just read out link and then whatever the actual link is to help the content be a little bit more accessible and easy to understand. So what I also did was to address the end-to-end experience, I inserted a bit of text to help clarify how the user will get their certificate from Ontario Creates. It didn't originally exist, so I just kind of made up something there. And then, the green highlights indicate where things need fact check from a subject matter expert. And so that's where I would call a subject matter expert in to help me sort of complete this information and make sure it's correct. So also after Googling, I found this number, this help support number from the Ontario Creates application page, but I couldn't confirm the hours of operation. So again, I've highlighted it in green, to basically kind of note that it needs to be checked and flagged by a subject matter expert. Okay, so the last thing I did is that I added a step 5 to basically, because essentially while I was doing user research, I learned that the Canada Revenue Agency has web content for each of these tax credits that walks through users through the submission process once they get to the Canada Revenue Agency. And so basically to avoid repetition, I use a bit of introductory text and then a bulleted list and meaningful links to send users to the specific CRA sections that they needed to go to in order to complete the task, right? So I also added a bit of a preamble to help to just kind of explain the fact that there are other steps before this step. So I'm trying to capture the user who skips directly down to this section from the table of contents. I just wanted to give a quick little blurb to let them know that, hey, there are other steps that you have to complete before you take this step. So that was a little bit of to provide a bit of support to the user who may just decide to skip straight to the section. And then basically what I did was I added and I created basically a brand new after you file your claim section. So I added this section because it's important, again, to content design for the end-to-end service, right? So although the original content included this information, it was not organized under one clear heading or subheadings. So therefore I grouped, or what we call in content design, chunked all the post-submission information under this heading to make it easy to scan, to read, and understand. So I want to just give you a quick preview of what the page looked like before. So this is pre-content design, right? And this is after content design. So you'll notice lots of white space, scannable, page title and lead that are very clear. And for this, I really want you to think about the fact that, like, for us anyway, on Ontario.ca, over 50% of the people who come to our webpage come through mobile phones. And so that's why content design principles are so important, because fundamentally, if you think about the way that you engage with websites or web content on your phone, often you land on a page and you start scrolling, right? And so content design is essentially designed to be, search engine optimized friendly, easy to navigate, easy to find information that you need, fully accessible, and just really sort of like aligns with the way that people read information on the web or on apps and things like that. So that's a little bit of a breakdown of my content design process and a bit about the history of content design. And I've reached the end for now. So now I'm going to just pass it on to Clara.
All right. Well, great presentation. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Clara Gonzalez-Sueyro, and I lead research at California Office of Digital Innovation. And today, I'm going to share a little bit about finding out what people want. So this is the agenda for today. How to fail, assume you know what people want. How to succeed, find out what people want. And then how to do more of number 2. How to fail. I'm going to start with my personal story. I co-founded Chef Surfing in 2012. We started with this big idea, Airbnb for food. Why not? We thought that people wanted to buy food from the neighbors, and then the neighbors could make some extra bucks by sharing food or selling food. And at the time, it was a novel and non-existent idea, so it felt even more desirable. But we spent over a year building the service, and when we decided to launch, we soon realized we had no product market fit. And there were many reasons: legal issues, trust, but the whole idea here is it was a waste of time, capital, energy, and it could have been prevented. But thankfully, I was not alone in this club of failed endeavors. There's actually a thing called museumoffailure.com that collects all these failures. And even recognized companies such as Microsoft, right, failed. The Zune was their Me Too product to compete with the iPod, which proved to be a complete flop, and it was an example to follow competition. In an attempt to change its image, McDonald's introduced a new burger with a more adult taste, targeting a fictional persona called Urban Sophisticates. The company invested like over $300 million to develop this burger, and it flopped. It was considered one of the most expensive failures in the food industry. Again, Google Glass was a tech-focused product. Now they are like retargeting, but it had no market fit and it was discontinued. And it was focused on technology. And then Quibi, I found out recently about it. It was a short-form streaming platform that generated content for mobile devices. And the whole proposition was the idea that people will consume high-quality short-form content on mobiles. What the executives didn't acknowledge is that people were already getting this for free. And they had over a 1.7 billion in capital, venture capital, and 6 months after, they shut down. Why do I say all this? Because all of these examples can, I call it like 4 distractions that can lead to failure, right? React to competition, target fictional segments, focus on technology, or idea obsession. And governments are no exceptions. They can fail for the same similar reasons. So what do they have all this in common? Well, I feel like flops are built on the premise, build it and they will come. I found success in meeting or finding more success by meeting people where they are. As much as we need to celebrate and embrace failure, I think there are opportunities to minimize failures. So if that's how you fail, then how do you succeed? I'll start with another story. This is Guia Egreso was a project I led for the World Bank in 2011. The project was meant to help youth in foster care transition out of foster care. And so we start just by listening to their stories. Then what we did as facilitators, we wanted to uncover these outcomes that they had to facilitate solutions to match those needs. So one outcome they had was like, we want to learn from each other. And so we created workshops to design their shared stories. They also wanted to share their personal stories with other folks that were going through the same situation. And so what we did, it was like we created a website with stories that have all kind of clips and even tips around education, rights, and all of things that people need when they transition out of foster homes. And they also wanted to create long-lasting impact. And so we propose legislation to protect them a little bit more, non-existent at the time. The result was, took some years, but in 2017, legislation was passed where legislation gave them rights and monthly income for these folks that were transitioning out of foster care until they were 21 or 25 years old. They also appear on the media. There was a lot of coverage around it, and they are now part of a group that is called Latin American Network, where they share their own experiences. I consider this success because it really met people where they were, and we focus on uncovering their own outcomes and building solutions according to their needs. And another story, which is a government story, it's King's Cross in Sydney, Australia. This is a state and local government program that started kind of with the wrong focus, and then they pivot and deliver a program that addresses people's needs. So Keith Dorst, professor of design at the University of Technology in Sydney, was hired to address a concern that Sydney state and local officials had. And it was like King's Cross is known for like a lot of nightlife and at the time, a lot of violence, right? Alcohol-fueled violence. So what they were doing up until that point is like, tightening the regulations and increasing the police presence, which made it really hard for like people that just wanted to have fun like they were felt like they were like criminals, right? Having police there all the time. So what it happened, thinking about outcomes and solution, is the team approached the problem by understanding people's need, right? Again, same idea. People want to have fun and socialize. So what they did was increase opportunities to chill outside the bars, because the bars were crowded. And so people were like kind of like trying eager to fight and get inside. So they make the outdoors kind of a little bit more user friendly. They also wanted to get back home safe. And this sounds obvious, but transportation was an issue at the time. People were arriving at midnight and the last train was leaving at 1:20 in the morning, which means that all people, they were all together in a row waiting for get to the train until the 6 a.m. train happened again or appear again. So what they did is they actually increased transportation options, more trains and buses, and like guide people to the station. And lastly, they wanted to feel welcome and safe. They wanted to have fun. This is what nightlife kind of looks like. And having the police there was not great. So they created, or they suggested to have like guides, younger guys with bright teachers that help people kind of navigate. It was like to replace the police. The results are King Cross plan management. It was a plan that actually was executed and used a lot of recommendations that the team had. And not only that, but also it had influenced a lot of thinking in nightlife in other cities across the world. So how to find out what people want. And I'll divide this in kind of like mindset and then the practices and what my process. So I mentioned this idea of outcomes, right? So people don't want a quarter-inch drill, and this might be known to a lot of folks here. They want a quarter-inch hole. This is like a statement that Levitt did in his essay in 1960s. And he basically says, businesses will do better if they concentrate on meeting customer needs rather than selling products. And I even go further and say people don't want a hole, they want to hang a memory, and they will do that either with a hole or a picture hanger hook already existing out there. So this goes across the board, right? Like companies sell products to kill weeds, and this is just one example, but farmers want to grow crops. Salespeople don't want CRMs, right? They just want a good relationship. In the past, they used the phone and like internet. And so the whole idea here is, and examples can go on and on, is people want to get something done. They have a purpose and they use a product or a service to get that done. And the focus should be on the problem, on the person, so that you can get the outcomes the way that I presented in the previous examples. So this is your team. This is the solution, right? And this is kind of the problem to be solved. What happens at the solution space is like we have control, influence. If we brainstorm for 5 minutes, we'll get a lot of different ideas, many options. And this is the problem. The problem is specific. It doesn't change quickly. It's actually pretty stable over time. It's not under our control, and it might be difficult to understand. But unless you have an understanding of the problem, you're going to keep trying and iterating and failing the way that I proved before. So how I find out what people want. This is my process. There's many ways, but this is what I'll do. And it's a combination of qualitative research, starting with interviews to understand what people want, right? So you don't focus on your product or service. You want to see what they're trying to get done in their lives, progress they want to make in their lives. Then you uncover those outcomes, that comes from their own perspective. So you focus on understanding those metrics and measures they use to value the job. You quantify, this is a quantitative leg, quantified outcomes in terms of satisfaction and importance. Not everybody value the same. And then you segment around those outcomes, right? Like this is where the segmentation, I believe, comes. Like early on is too premature. You don't have enough data. You want to segment around needs, around outcomes, which is what I presented. And because you ask a lot of information about environment identities, then you can factor and understand, okay, why are this group of people together around these needs? What pushed them to be together? And oftentimes, this is not demographics. This is some other factor. So this brings the qualitative part, the quantitative, and a third leg, which is the segmentation, which is cluster and factor analysis. So it's a pretty complete process. And so, as I mentioned, you start with interviews, right? So these are the do's and don'ts, the do's and don'ts when interviewing, according to myself. Do choose a specific behavior. Do talk about people's goals. Do gather information about their outcomes. That's, to me, is the core of all of this. Do consider factors, right? Identity, circumstance, environments. Those are important to consider, because that's when you segment, you'll find out why are these people struggling to get that outcome, and segment around needs. Don't talk about your solution. Don't talk about competitor solutions. Don't segment early on. Most of the times with researchers, we do personas and we do it early on, and we have incomplete data or even biased data, right? Don't just interview your existing users. Interview all the people that are trying to get something done and not even using your product yet. And this is kind of some ideas, like if, and I think Bridget mentioned this before, there's like, like someone can go through different steps. So this is like in a job, or like in what they try to get something done, they go through the define, locate, gather, prepare. They go through all the different steps. So you can ask the column questions: who, what, where, when, why, to gather all these outcomes. The whole idea here is in each of these rows, you will complete outcomes, right? And this can go from 50 to 150 outcomes. So these are some references that I have. Levitt, Clayton Christensen, who's a professor at Harvard that died a few years ago, Tony Ulrich, and Indy Young, who talks about mental models and listening sessions. But let me just, in practice, how might we apply this, right? And let's put an example that I think everybody might be familiar with: food stamps, SNAP, CalFresh. So this is extracted from the website, right? It's like CalFresh is for people with low income who wants to add to their budgets to put healthy and nutritious food on the table. This is their mission statement. And we can assume that, I haven't interviewed the folks, but I'm assuming that makes kind of sense. So thinking about the steps, this will be the first, right? What do they want to get done when they hire the food stamps? Okay, they want healthy and nutritious food on the table. Here is where I challenge, and this is just doing desk research, not doing interviews yet, but there's some studies that says, and statistics that says that people value taste and price, which makes sense, over health, healthfulness. So what this does to me is it says, okay, let's remove healthy and nutritious, because those might be not metrics that people value, and specifically people that maybe rely on food stamps, right? Price might be, and it's for everybody, but it might be an issue even. So let's put food on the table as the job that people are trying to get done, right? And this is, again, it's trying to bring kind of the needs of the people using it instead of like governments, thinking that this is what they need. Then we talk about the steps. This is some of the steps that you will have to get done to get the food on the job. Now the food, put food on the table. You gotta get food. But then when I think about all these other steps, there's a lot of things that people have to do prior to that and after that. So there's a meal planning, go shopping, store the ingredients, cook. There's a lot of things. And if I even spend more time, I get more steps, right? And this is where we having like, and Bridget mentioned this as well, like having the full service, right? Understand the end-to-end. This is important because people have to get these things done somewhere else, right? Food stamps are definitely not helping at all of the steps, but they are getting it. So my thing is here is most of the time happens with most of the services and products that we have out there. They get just a little bit of the food for job, like put food on the table. That will be the food job. CalFresh, SNAPs, or food stamps only get a little bit. And, but the problem is still there. This is a photo of a popular photo of Florence Owens, who was a migrant at 32 years old, who came to California in the 36. And this is today, right? There's still a need for food stamps. The problem didn't change, but the solutions might have evolved. And so this is what shopping looks today. It's completely different as someone in 1940 going to the corner store, knowing the person who sells there, know where the eggs came from, and building a relationship, versus shopping online with a phone. There's a lot of like junk food that the supermarkets present. There's a lot of food waste. So the context is different. We are in a completely different food environment. So this is what shopping looks like. And so it's different. So are we sure that food stamps are satisfying the needs of people in this current environment? This is what food stamps will look in this full job, right? They only satisfy that aspect. But let me bring something else. I mean, I order one of these food services. I use it for myself to put food on the table. And it helps me get more of the steps done. Why is that? They help with tasty meals. They help reduce the time that it takes to cook, and they remove the trip to the grocery store, right? So in this same framework, the food boxes help to get more done. Choose recipe, go shopping, buy food versus the food stamps. What do I mean by this? So this is when I think about the food stamps, it's just an opportunity for us, people working in government and people just working in the private sector to revisit existing solutions and better understand what they're being used for and how to improve based on their own needs. Focusing on people's outcomes, for me, it's the most centered approach. Basically, you are giving the power to the people to tell you what they want and where are they struggling. And then you use your solutions to weigh against those outcomes and see, okay, we are doing a good job here, we are not doing a good job here. This, maybe we should reframe and rethink what food stamps look like. So this is all from me. Reach out to me at clara@digital.ca.gov, and thanks for being here.